Welcome to the Path to Podcast Success. My name is Evan Johnson, and I want to share with you how to develop and maintain a successful podcast. My guests and I will discuss all things podcasting and how your podcast can become an essential part of your business. That means more revenue, better relationships with your audience, and so much more. If you haven't already, check out our website at ipodcastedit.com and enter your email address to get each episode delivered directly to your inbox, along with some other free information I'm sure you'll find useful. Get ready to turn on your mic and join me on the path to podcast success. Hey everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Path to Podcast Success. I have an incredible guest today, and that is actually Jason Kanigan. And it's really interesting. He is involved in the field of space and space studies. So it was really interesting to be able to talk with him about that and how he has used his podcast around. This is actually only part one of a two-part episode. Part two hasn't been recorded quite yet as of this launch of this podcast episode, so it won't be the following episode released, but keep an eye out for part two of this episode. We dive into some really interesting topics, and I think you guys are going to really get a lot out of this. So I hope you guys enjoy, and please, if you do, leave a review, leave us a rating, and let me know. I'd love to hear your feedback, and I'd love to hear what things you'd like me to talk about in future episodes, or if you have anyone in mind that you'd like me to interview, please don't hesitate to send them my way. I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Hi, Jason. Thank you so much for being willing to take the time to come on to my show today. I really do appreciate it.
You bet.
So I like to start off in the same place with everyone, and that is by asking, what was your biggest fear of podcasting when you first started out? And did that fear end up coming true?
So I've been a copywriter for over 20 years. I've been interviewed by Dan Kennedy's company, the president of Glazer Kennedy. Made a lot of money for people by writing. And the biggest thing you want to do is have a target market and be relevant.
Right.
Relevant. So my biggest fear was I was going to produce a show that had all this great content, but wasn't relevant to a target audience. And that is actually what I found out to be true for quite some time.
Really? Okay, so that did come true, and then what changed? Because you're still working at it, so something must have changed.
Well, I'm a very persistent person. First of all, I kind of laugh when I see people. There's a kind of a bot on Twitter that retweets people saying that they're going to start a podcast, and I laugh every time I see that. Thinking about starting a podcast? Good for you, dude. Come and talk to me when you've got 10 or 12 episodes, and then we'll speak, right? You know, a lot of people produce 1-2 episodes and then ditch the thing because it's too much work. So there was a lot of that. I was hunting for a target market and the right audience, and it did take a while. There's a couple factors that I think we'll get into as we go. The first is producing a body of work. You must produce a body of work if you want to be taken seriously as a professional. And I've done this before. I have a sales and marketing blog that in January will have been around for 5 years. 5 years. How many people do you know have had a blog for 5 years, right? It's the same thing as the podcast. I'm going to start a blog, you know. And it doesn't suck up a lot of my time. In the beginning, I produced a lot of articles for it, but now I do one a month. You know, and it's maintenance work, right? It's no big deal. And I write about something I want to write about, and I just do it, and there it is. But there's a body of work. There's going to, shortly be 5 years of posts there, all grabbing content, interest, eyeballs, and getting people to learn about me. And so the same thing here with the podcast is you need to produce a body of work. So a lot of people produce something that's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and they hop around, and there's maybe kind of a center to their topics, right? Like an idea, but they get people on who are from this field and that field and this other field, and it's really disjointed, right? And that is not really a body of work. So I started out trying to get the attention of software as a service providers, like creators of these things, programmers on Facebook. And it was awful. It was awful. I found out that they were disorganized and not interested in systemizing and having an actual plan. I've been around that industry a long time. I was helping people out there in the real software as a service world with value-added resellers in 2010 and 2011 and that. So long before this generation who just got out of high school a few years ago and are out there even heard about it. And so Microsoft and Sage and other big developers were running these things. And then accounting firms and that were like the local resellers. So I had seen things in other industries. So I knew a body of work was important and being relevant was important. And gosh darn it, if I got a lot of people from the software as a service field on my show, but could hardly get any business from it. It just didn't work. And so I got frustrated with that. But the thing is, everybody, and you'll see this in a Dan Kennedy presentation as well. He'll have, if you don't know who that is, he's a marketer, copywriter who's been around forever, produced a lot of great books and that. And that's for your audience, not you necessarily, Evan. But he has a sign in the back of his room in the presentation behind him facing the audience that shows up on videos and pictures of these things. And it always makes me laugh, and I've written about it on my blog. And the sign says, "But Dan, my business is different." and it's a joke, right? Because everybody believes their business is different, but actually it's all the same. It's all the same. You know, the words may be a little different, the language of that target market, that niche may be different, but the principles are the same. And so everything that I produced along the way about scaling businesses ostensibly focused on software as a service firm is still directly relevant to any other business trying to grow. And so what I did was not wasted, let's put it that way, right? It just needed, it was like a crystal needing to be, the lattice needed to be reoriented, you know, towards a new audience. And so a few months ago, I decided to turn to space as a field that I've always wanted to be in, and kind of tiptoed around the edges of for a while. Started doing some episodes, interviews with folks in the space industry, but really decided to go full bore into it. Added a whole new section to my company. We just got listed on something called New Space Hub. So we're being taken seriously in there. There's other things that I've done to kind of bite into that market. But since making that change, there's been quite an upswing in relevancy for that target market. So it's you know, it's not enough to have something to say, is what I want to get across here. It's not enough to have expertise. You have to be saying it or sharing it with people who believe also, who agree that it is important. And you can have business owners from an industry on your show, which I did. I didn't want it just to be me jumping up and down going, hey, there's going to be unexpected challenges of growing your business, right? I wanted other business owners who had been on, who had scaled their businesses and would say, yeah, all you folks who think that the next bag of money is going to solve your problems, no, you need systems, process improvement, and different style of thinking than what you've been used to, this scrambling for money thing that most newbie business owners are in. But they don't want to hear it. They just don't want to hear it. So I had to get it in front of a group that did want to hear it.
Right. Okay. So essentially, so you started out, you had your podcast. You had, you know, you knew that you knew what you had to do to make it successful. You knew you had to create a body of content. You knew how to do these things, you know, for the most part. But you realized that the people you were trying to do it for weren't the right people.
Right.
So it wasn't catching. It wasn't working the way you thought it would. So all you did was make a shift to, and so for those listeners out there, essentially sit down and think about, okay, well, who would benefit from what I'm trying to say? Would that be kind of the thought process?
More than just who would benefit from it, because those folks would benefit from it, but their ears and eyes are closed to it. They don't care. They're just interested. And I just saw a post in one of the big SaaS groups recently. I still peek in there once in a while. Of a guy who said, look, we got, you know, $360,000, I think, in revenue in a month here. And I watched it all bleed away because suddenly now I had all these fulfillment problems and I couldn't do it, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about here. And that got some attention because it was clearly one of us who was posting, but it still didn't sink in, you know? So you've got to get it to an audience who cares, who really wants to know about this kind of thing.
Okay. And so a question related to that would be, if there are people out there who have a podcast and it's they started it and it's been taking time to develop, and they're not sure if it's gonna work or if the
Hmm.
audience is interacting with it. How would they decide whether to be patient and stay that course and wait it out and see how it grows, or should they decide to um make a change, like make a big change in the podcast? How should that decision process go, and how do you decide that?
Mm. It's toughy because I put it off for a long time, right? So I may not be the best person to to talk about that, but I guess, what kind of feedback are you getting? Are you getting likes and shares and comments and things like that, first of all, and the quality um, of that dialogue? Are you getting any kind of dialogue with your target market? Like, I knew that a podcast about the unexpected challenges of scaling businesses was not going to be a mass market success, right? As much as I would like it to be, that podcast that reviews McDonald's chicken strip dips or something like that is always going to be more popular, right? I don't care. What I am interested in is producing a small but highly interested customer base, right? Potential customer base who recognize, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. This guy is connected to the right kind of people. This guy can help me. Okay, and then come and approach me, which has happened even with the software as a service people, but that's a tiny fraction, whereas space has been much better. So, so
Right. So
yeah, so I guess,
yeah.
go ahead.
I was going to say, it's instead of trying to aim for thousands and thousands and thousands
Hmm.
of listeners, aim for a smaller number of listeners who is more specialized and who you can
Right.
really, really engage with.
Right. Yeah, that's more important to me. So maybe 10 or 12 episodes. I think you should know. I'm coming up to 100 now. I think we're at 96 this week, and I've got a bunch
Nice.
recorded and in the can. So again, I don't know many people who have persisted around that long. And that's about a year and a half. There was a hurricane last year in the fall that kicked me off for about 6 weeks. Just really, power was out at my home office for 9 days.
Wow.
It was September, October. It was really gross. It was hot,
Ugh.
and that just took the wind out of my sails for a bit for some of this stuff. But I got
Right.
back into it. So yeah, and what you can do is what I did with space was, I treated everything, 80 some odd episodes up to that point, as season one. And
Okay.
then everything that I did going forward, that was purely going to be just, is it about space and small sats, CubeSats, small satellites, right? That's it. That's season 2 now. And that's all that I'm going to talk about. I've got a couple of sort of leftover guests from that earlier period who we had talked, and then they'd come back sometime later and said, okay, hey, can I still be on? And I'm like, you're not relevant to space, but I will do the interview and I will release it as part of season 1. Right.
Okay.
So you can chunk it up like that. Say, okay. And I found playlists on YouTube are very good for that. Making separate, smaller playlists. So you've got the big long one with the 90 odd episodes, but here are the dozen that are for space and small sats that are out right now. Here are ones about infrastructure. Here are ones about sales and marketing. Right. So the ability to slice and dice it up and give subtopics that are relevant to people lets them binge watch, and also have a better feeling, I think, of hey, this is right for me.
Exactly. So essentially, if someone is out there, has their podcast, and it's slow to grow, look
Mm-hmm.
at the engagement as far as, should
Mm-hmm.
you make a change or should you just stay the course and trust it'll grow? So look and
Mm-hmm.
see what they engage. If you have some positive engagement that as time goes on, you'll get more. It'll gain more traction. But if you don't really have any engagement or any positive engagement, then make a change. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and Evan, I have met a number of people who have succeeded with podcasting, and I know mine has directly resulted in clients, right? So I know,
Okay.
and I'm not looking for a huge number. I don't need a huge number because I don't do $200 things. But
Right.
that's the important measure for me. So
Okay.
yeah, what kind of results are you getting from it?
Okay. And another question that's related to that would be, how did you keep the morale up instead of just saying, oh, this isn't working, I'm going to drop it. This podcast thing isn't working for me. How did you say, no, I'm going to stick with it?
Okay, so I'm weird in this respect, and my friends who know me well will tell you it takes me a while to commit to something, like to change my mind. I'll be resistant to change, right? I'll get on my face, don't do it. But once I've made the change, I've made it, and I don't need any. It's not about momentum or emotion or anything like that. Like I was 270 pounds in 2 Februarys ago, and I'm 217 right now or something like that. And I've lost about a pound a week or so. And there have been periods where it's been, very stable. I've had to change something, diet and exercise or something like that. But for me to persist in that diet and those habits and exercising in that, there's been no difficulty whatsoever because I want the end result. And so for the podcast, it's the same thing. Once I said I'm going to have this podcast, it exists, right? It's part of my life. It's built into it. And there's other things that I'm doing today. I have a little daily thing that I do called Make Space Boring, where I do a quick update of less than 10 minutes, probably 2 minutes to 6 minutes, somewhere in there, of who I'm meeting and what I'm learning in the space field. And that's been really good as a connection or an addition to the Cold Star Project, the big episode, because it's a daily thing. It allows me to tag the heck out of people and things on social media and pull them in and say, I met with this person. And of course, I'm going to get a like from that person, right? And probably a comment. And so that's been very helpful. And then I'm able to say, hey, it's Monday and a new episode of the Cold Star Project came out, and here it is. And so, but that's something recent, and hopefully we can get into that too, because there were mistakes that I made that I knew I was making as I made them.
Right, I get it. Yeah, that happens to everyone, where you're going through, you're making a mistake, and it's like, oh, me, this feels wrong. But yeah, I get it. So essentially, for those people out there who are feeling hard put with the motivation, thinking, maybe I should give it up. So you're saying essentially have your end goal in mind. Remember, okay, well, why did you start a podcast in the first place? A podcast is a long game, I've found. So if you keep that in mind, then hopefully that should give you the motivation to keep putting it out there.
Yeah, I'm laughing at myself right now because I realized I got off track in answering that last question. What I was beginning to say before I got trapped by my own eloquence was, I have met people who have been in the long game, as you say, and it took them like 2 years to start getting anywhere with the podcast and developing a real audience in that. And I'm a year and a half into mine. Right. And I can't say I've got a huge number of listeners or anything like that. Again, it's not meant to have mass market success, but it's doing its job. It's leading to clients. And the big thing that a podcast does give you the ability to do is make those connections. And I'm sure we'll get into that question with you shortly.
Right. Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. That's a huge part of podcasting for me is building those relationships and building those connections. Yeah. So it sounds to me like, do you do one interview a week and then more solo episodes that are shorter? Like, what's your system?
So when I started out, I think, so if we were to go back to like August or October 2017, 18, something like that, I was doing one of each a week, but that, I don't know, it just, you got to produce something, right, to be consistent. But it's not about the content so much. So the way I've got it now is that if I open my schedule up to everybody and anybody who wants to come along, other people will suck up my time, and they will do it fast. And you will get the feeling of activity, but you won't get results doing that. One of the things that I found out in a previous business is that you need to keep some time away to be a creator. And we call these maker days. There's a Paul Graham post. If you Google maker day or maker schedule versus manager schedule, by Paul Graham or Phil Graham, one or the other. It's really good. Maker schedule versus manager schedule. That term will definitely get you to this old school blog with this very interesting article on how to divide your time. And essentially it says managers book by the hour. And they like interruptions and they like meeting and talking to people, and you just meet for coffee or whatever, right? But if you're a programmer or a writer or a strategic thinker, right, you're screwed with that schedule. You will not even start doing deep work, as Cal Newport would call it, if you know you might be interrupted in 2 hours. So like the whole morning is shot if you've got a half an hour meeting somewhere in there, right? And you might not even begin anything for the whole day now because of that. So we knew after about a year of working together, this ex-partner of mine and I, that we needed maker days, okay? And the reason I'm saying this is I keep very careful control over my calendar and have set it up so you can book through Acuity. It's a great software that I've been using for years. And I have categories of days, and you can only record or book to record a podcast episode with me on Mondays or Tuesdays. And to heck with you for the rest of the week, because I need that time for me. Now, politics and exceptions are the rule of the game, and if somebody is really stuck, or there's somebody in Australia where they're 13 or 15 hours ahead of us or something on the East Coast here, I have to do something to get around that, right? And I will book a special time occasionally. But for the most part, I record 2 to 4 episodes a week. I try not to do more than 1 a day. And then the audio, what am I saying? The personal ones, the ones where it's just me talking, the solo ones, there's the word. I will do those when I feel like, okay, here's a topic that I really want to dig into. And so I really have to mean it and feel it and go, okay, this fits in with it. And I've done a couple of those Make Space Boring news episodes on topics like that, where I've dug into something pretty nerdy in the space field about some kind of regulations and that kind of thing. And those are great because I get to, on my other screen here, bring up a bunch of articles and things like that and notes. And then I just record those by audio. And if you were to listen to the original version of me recording it versus the end result, you would be baffled, because the original, because it's audio and not video like this, right, I can take long pauses. I can, get stupid and figure my way out of the problem, right? And right, in the audio editing, you just cut all that stuff out and stick a nice graphic over top with a name on it, and you've got yourself an episode of 12 minutes, but the original was half an hour or something. So audio only is an excellent tool for podcasting, and video is for those with guts. Let me tell you, you got a lot to manage right now. People don't appreciate that. I've got a lot of newbie guests on, but I've got some experienced guests on too. And the experienced guests are always like, wow, you're a great interviewer. And I go, yeah, well, I've been doing this since 2011, number one. And you got a lot to juggle doing this stuff. And this guy here, guys, Evan, he's got to keep ahead of me. He needs to know what he's going to do next. And so sometimes he'll stop and be thinking and stuff, and it's not easy. So they book on usually a Monday or Tuesday. We meet by Zoom like this. I set up a Google Doc and share it with them, and we drop notes in there, and that gives them all the information that they need. Some of my guests have security requirements or compliance requirements where they're not allowed to talk about their technology or the latest whiz bang thing, or some financial thing that's about to happen, right? So I need to know that to keep us on the rails of the conversation. And I usually put 6 to 8 questions in there. They put notes in there. And so before we get on the show, it's very rare that we don't do this. And I've got 125 of these, at least, these Google Docs in a Google Drive folder. We know what we're going to talk about and the rails that we're going to stay on for that discussion. But that still, you'll hear me come up with a sub question or a follow-up question, but we'll keep on the rails. I did do an episode recently on space insurance with Bob Weirdy, and there was no prep there, but we had gone through our own more in-depth presentation of those issues a week or two before. So I was going by memory, and I just let him through, and we stayed away from any compliance issues and then that kind of thing. So, but that's rare. Most of the time, I want to emphasize we do a lot of prep for this, but it's not a big time suck. I have been told by friends that I'm very good at coming up with questions. It's the kind of thing where I'm like, I don't want to do it, but I usually book it for Saturday morning for the week ahead, and I look at the 2 or 3 or whatever episodes that I'm going to do for the next week and spend. It's always less time than you think it's going to be, you know. Oh, yeah. So I bang out that list of questions, maybe half an hour. Message the guest and say, hey, are these okay? You know, did I ask something that I shouldn't have, or did I miss something that you want to talk about? Because my goal is for these folks, these guests, to use this appearance as a marketing tool. I want them to use it as an authority marketing piece. Look, I got interviewed by Jason Kanigan. It's a good show. He runs a good interview, and they get to talk about what they want to talk about, right? I just had Dr. Rick Fleeter, who's the technical advisor for my company, tell me I am a bit like a journalist, and that I do apparently ask questions more about what I want to ask than the comfort zone of that guest wants to talk about. And that's good, because you don't want them just giving the same stump speech. Right. I used to run a sales training business, so if I'd been on your show, say in 2015, I would have given a very standard interview about sales training. And I would have talked about the same 6 or 7 things, and I would have been bored out of my mind for the most part of it, right? Right. So resting that with a W, resting that guest out of their comfort zone, hauling them out of their comfort zone by their collar and making them think, and then that creates a memorable experience. And so the emotional friendship, you know, alliance type thinking. I mean, that's where Rick Fleeter came from for my company, was an interview that I did with him. And then we talked more after, and he said, hey, how about I help you? How about I join you? Like, okay. You know, it's not, it's so good things can turn out from these discussions. So we record, it goes into Zoom. I have had, and some friends of mine have had, some negative experiences with Zoom recording it up into the cloud, which is where it is there. So we make sure that we record to our machines. So everything's on the hard drive here. And so I'll stack those up, and I just go and grab the next interview. I'm a good video editor. It's really not that complicated. And so I've got my pieces of the puzzle, you know, a little bit of music, a couple of graphics, a logo, pull that into the video editor. For me to find an interesting minute or two clip to pull out and stick as a teaser on the front doesn't take very long. I just skip through. That could be a skill or a talent. I'm not sure which, but I just whip through. And so although I have enumerated a number of steps here, this does not take very long. I can edit a 45-minute interview in about 15 minutes and get it's like 4 or 5 tracks. I know what naming the thing probably takes the longest, because I've got to flip in and listen, and I probably haven't heard the episode in 6 weeks because we recorded it back then. So I'm like, right. Okay, what is this about exactly? Like, not just general topic, but, you know, coming up with a title for it that's interesting and markety a little bit, and slap that on there. I get that ready, it renders, I just go away and let the computer render it, and we're done. And then it's ready to upload, and then I strip the audio out and put that up as on Anchor as the audio version, and that goes out to 10 different sites like iTunes and Spotify and that. And then recently, so for season 2, the space stuff, I started grabbing 2 short segments, one about 2 minutes, and the other 5-6 minutes, because Twitter has a maximum upload of 2 minutes, 20 seconds, and Facebook and LinkedIn. And that's where most of my effort is on LinkedIn these days. Like 95% is on LinkedIn. I'm hardly doing anything on Facebook at all, because my market is not there, as we've proven. So I still pick up a thing or two there, but the big money is in LinkedIn. So but I wanted native video segments on those applications. And this is stuff that people don't know about. I've been using Twitter for 3 years or so and didn't know that they have their own studio app. Twitter has their own studio app that's a separate thing, and you have to log into it separately, and there you can upload your video and put transcript on it and make a little package with that, and then you can tweet that with some other Christmas tree ornament around it out from there and see your stats. And it's a completely different experience than using Twitter the way that I used to use it, or that I would imagine most people use it. So I didn't even know that existed until I started Googling around about, what can I do with video on Twitter? LinkedIn, same kind of thing. You can upload a video there under 10 minutes and add captions to it. This again may all sound very complicated. It's not once you get into the rhythm of it. It's a very quick thing. I do it every day for the Make Space Boring segment. So I upload it to YouTube. I go and grab the captions from there. I edit them to make them make sense, and it doesn't take too long because it's going to be a 5-minute or 2-minute video anyway. It doesn't take that long to go through and do that for. I download it. It downloads it at the wrong kind of format. I think something called SRV, but there's a captionsconverter.com where you can upload your file that's not in the right format and convert it to a .srt file and click convert and download, and now you've got a file. Right. And so you have to rename it to get it to fit on to Facebook. It wants you to do this .en_US or something. It's like there's a couple little tweaky things you have to learn, is what I'm saying. But once you learn them, it's really no big deal. Like, nothing I've said here is complicated. You could make a process document for this that would be half a page long or less and outsource it to somebody for $5 an hour. This is not a big deal. So
podcasting, I've found, is one of those things where most of the work, as far as having to figure stuff out, is on the front end.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you first start, you have to figure all of this out.
Right.
And then when it's figured out, it's figured out. And it's not like it's new every week or something different.
No.
When you figure it out, it's just, you just do it, right? The only new thing that you do is recording new content.
Right.
And you just plug it in and use your systems that you develop at the beginning. It's really developing those systems, right? You develop a system, it takes that time and that effort at the beginning, but then when you have it, and you keep using it.
And I will remind everyone that the first dozen of everything are awful.
Oh yeah.
And not that my podcast episodes are awful, but they're not as good as the ones that came after, right? I was finding my voice. I was finding, okay, what is interesting? What's a good format here? And I still missed out on things. And starting over with season 2 for Space for the Cold Star Project, I knew, and I had known for quite some time, like probably 50 episodes, that I had made a major mistake in not having something for people to opt into, for the podcast, something for them to go get, right, to keep track, to download, it didn't even matter what it was. And I have courses and things like that, but they're all sales training things. They're not directly relevant, there's that word again, right, to the space stuff. So I had to go create something new, and it wasn't a huge deal, but I just didn't have it before then. I knew I didn't have it, and I've been telling friends who have started shows in the meantime, look, you got to build this in from day one. It'll make such a big difference, right? And that led to a little snippet in the middle of the show, a little audio that I recorded to plop in the middle, telling people to opt in for this, right? And it's just, and then a daily, so it's another mouth to feed in the sense that, okay, now I've got to email everybody every day, but big deal, it's another 2-minute thing, but so there is a balance here about, I don't want it to suck up all my time, but on the other hand, it does need the salt and pepper to taste good, right? For people to want to eat it. So there is a certain mass that is necessary to do all this stuff.
Right. Okay. So does that mean, do you do all of the process yourself, or do you have an outsource?
Yeah, I do, but I could easily outsource it, like I've said. I've just found that it's faster for me to, and I know I'm reliable. I
Right.
know I'm going to get to it now and do it. And yeah, it really doesn't take very long, like I said. And I do most of the editing and processing and that on the weekends, so it doesn't suck up a whole lot of my time. It's just a matter of uploading and sharing during the day.
Right. That's interesting. And I like your process as well, because
Mhm.
I have found, and I'm sure that this is true, and I've heard that this is true for some people. I've heard the stories. If you just have your calendar open, right?
Mm-hmm.
People come in and book whenever,
Yep.
then it's a lot easier to get burned out. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you have 2 interviews a day, Monday through Friday, then like you said, a lot of those, none of those are maker days. I thought that
Right.
was really
Right.
interesting, by the way. I'm
Yep.
going to be using that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't put that together, but I've been experiencing that. So it's interesting to put words to it. But
Yep.
anyway, people they have interviews so much that they get burned out, and then they don't do much other than their time. It feels like all of their time is spent just interviewing people for a podcast. So,
Right.
limit it to a couple
Mm-hmm.
days. I mean, sometimes there might, like you said, be an exceptions that
Yep.
need to happen. But for the most part, if you limit it to those couple days, then it works out.
Right.
'Cause-
Yeah. Yeah. And like, this needs to remain fun.
Yeah.
If it turns into work, you're not going to do it. Right? It's the same thing as the diet and exercise, right? That's fun. I love going on walks. I go on walks 3 times a day for at least a mile, right? And it's fun. And there have been times in my life where, hey, guess what? I was fat, and gee, I can't go out on a walk. There's no time. Give me a break, right? It's all perception and it's all nonsense. It's all a nonsense story we're telling ourselves. So, yeah, making time for those things that are priorities and shoving out other things. There was last February, March, April, I got back into local networking in Wilmington, North Carolina, and I hadn't done any in like 10 years. And I didn't protect my calendar and my time, and within a couple of weeks I realized, oh my gosh, I'm driving around the city meeting all these people, and they're all very nice, but it's not resulting in work, and I'm not getting anything done. And I was
Right.
tired, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is not worth it, and I need to get it under control. So I created a special in-person visit type of appointment on Acuity, and made it available only on 1 or 2 days a week plus an evening here and there. So maybe 4 or 5 appointments a week people could fit into slots, and that's it. Right.
Right.
And immediately, boom, suddenly you get all your time back. So yeah, podcasting, the Cold Start Project is my baby. I love it. And it matters to me. And I love the people that I meet, and I love the content that I'm creating with it, because we're having conversations and I'm sharing this stuff. And yeah, maybe only 100,000 people maximum will ever care about it or something like that. Right. But they're the right 100,000 people.
Exactly. Yeah. And put yourself in a room with 100,000 people. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if you just see those numbers online,
Mm-hmm.
then it's not that big of a deal. It's like, oh, okay, a couple zeros. But if
Right.
you put yourself on a stage and there's 100,000 people, even 500 people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if you have 500
Yep.
listeners, you just started your podcast, put yourself in a room with 500 people, and then it doesn't seem like such a small or insignificant number. So, yeah. And
Right.
so would your main tip then for those people who feel like they're getting burned out, perhaps, would be to restrict the schedule and really take control of your time?
Mm-hmm. That's a major thing, and have a why for sure, right?
Right.
Mine originally was to broadcast, hey, there are these unexpected challenges of scaling businesses that you're going to run into. If you're not careful, they're going to trip you up. And I still believe in that. It's just applied to space companies now specifically,
Right.
because they're the ones who want to hear about it. Something is special about space. It's a very friendly industry. I often joke, if I tried to get into the injection molded plastics industry, I would have been greeted with a lot more doors slammed in my face of people
Right.
being protectionist and wanting to hold on to what they have and whatnot. And space is hard,
Right.
and things explode, and and it's also very not cannibalistic, but I'm working for you today, you might be working for me tomorrow type industry. So it's been quite easy to connect with people in there. Oh, and we haven't even talked about this. Evan, having a podcast is one of the best giving things that you can have for marketing purposes, right? Like, there's so much, especially on LinkedIn or Facebook, bad social connection happening, right? Where I connect with you and immediately I'm dumping that private message into your folder of, hey, let's meet. Yeah, I got this thing and you should buy it, and that kind of thing, right? And I've always, that makes me want to puke, and I just hate it. I hate it. And I'm a marketer and a copywriter. I love selling things and making money. I just love it, right? So imagine, right?
Yeah.
And it's just not the way I want to do it. I want to develop a relationship first, and so a podcast is the ultimate soft, friendly thing to say, look, I've got this thing I can give and it's inoffensive. I've been, I'll just give another tip to nascent podcasters out there. When you are connecting with people that you believe are in your target market and you think they might be a good guest, and that's a good way of sorting potential connections and connecting with them. First of all, I don't use a message on LinkedIn to connect. I let my profile do all the talking. That headline does 90% of it, and then there's a description or about or whatever, but hardly anyone actually looks anymore. And there's a network effect. It's called the network effect. It's this knock-on thing where, like, initially 15 people in that niche, but after 2 weeks of consistent meeting people, now 1,000, and there's 50 mutual connections, and it's an easy decision for them to say, yeah, okay, right? Like, I connect with generals this way, right? I know a lot of Air Force generals and government officials and that I did not know 6 months ago because of this, and they don't come back with a whole harsh bunch of questions or anything like that. So anyway, if you think that this person would be a good guest, don't go, blah, I have this show and here are all the details and here's the booking link and stuff like that. That scares the hell out of people, and I know this from personal experience. What I do is, after several iterations of this, the most successful thing, and this works a lot, I would say half the people maybe don't answer me, but half do and say yes. And that's how I've been able to book so many episodes. I'm booked into March right now. Okay. We're in middle of December now, right? I've booked well out into March. Just a short yes or no question at the beginning. So it looks something like, hey, Evan, thanks for connecting. I host a show about blah, blah, blah. And I was thinking, with your experience, you would make a great guest. What do you think about the idea of being a podcast guest? ?
Right.
And it's simple, and it's inoffensive, and it's short, and they can make a quick yes or no decision. I've had like 2 or 3 people say no. No thanks. And they're very polite and they stay a connection, but there's something, and that's on them, right? That's not on me. There's something in their makeup that they're scared about being, on a show like this or something. So,
exactly.
Then when they say yes, then you can do the data dump. And I make a joke about it. They'll say, yeah, I'm interested. And then they'll ask the follow-up questions like, what the heck is the show, right? They don't look at my profile to find out or anything, They still want to be spoon-fed. But, what would you want to talk about? And then I can tell them, here's the booking link, here's the playlist. I set up a Google Doc so that we stay on track, et cetera, right? And make a joke about, I asked the simple question before doing the data dump. Here's the data dump, right? So that process, I hope that helps somebody who's listening. Makes it so much simpler and inoffensive.
It's I do pretty much the same thing. I'll probably mention, if I try to be strategic about who I have on the podcast.
Yeah.
Right. Especially if, I try to keep in the back of my head if someone I could have on the podcast would be a good business relationship or even potential client, because I do podcast editing myself. So of course I might be looking. I've gotten clients from podcasts. Of course, that's not my number one, has having a conversation and sharing value, right? So otherwise it wouldn't work. But have you have you done similar things where you are strategic about the people you have on the podcast as far as business goes?
Yeah. And there is, again, once you move into a new to you niche, you're not going to know who,
Right.
right? It's like every voice is going to have the same value. You have to learn to discern. You have to experience it, get in the river, get in the stream for a while and flow along is how I term it, before you can start finding out, okay, who's good and who's not. But after a pretty short while, it's pretty obvious, okay, that I keep seeing this person commenting all over the place and appearing, and people comment on their comments, so they get good traction and people are interested in their opinions in that. Obviously, I had a guy like Doug Lavero, who was a former Air Force colonel, was booked to be on my show, and he was, I wouldn't say he was unemployed. He was like an advisor, board of advisor member of a couple of companies. And right in between the time that he had booked and a couple of weeks later, NASA scooped him up to be head of manned spaceflight. And It's like, boom, there goes my guest. On the other hand, a year from now, maybe he'll come back and be a great guest, right? And be able to talk at a level that he couldn't talk at before. So picking and choosing is important.
Right. So what do you do when you find someone who would be a great guest, right? Reach out to them. They're interested, but they're afraid. They may be nervous about, I don't know if you've encountered this, but like all of my guests have podcasts of their own, so I haven't personally encountered this problem. But some of my clients and some of the people on my network have had this problem. Where people will be like, "It's exciting," but like you can tell they may not outright say it, but you can tell they're nervous about putting themselves out there and being interviewed. Have you encountered that? And if so, what do you do?
Rarely. The folks will usually say no, but it's rare if they don't want to be a guest. If they are nervous about it, probably the best thing you can do is have a phone call or a Zoom call like this, where it's just, hey, let's hop on for 10 minutes. And you can see what it's like, right? Like, if you look at my show, this is what it's like, unless I'm physically in person with the guest, right? It looks like this. It sounds like this. There's nothing scary about it. And once you've been on, you're like, oh, it's not that bad at all, right? So that's a big thing. I will occasionally get on with people for a quick call to discuss topics. If they have never been a guest before and we need to narrow down, we could do that through the Google Doc. Don't get me wrong. But that little kind of, if we were in the restaurant industry, table touching moment is very helpful for getting rid of those fear factors. I have had a couple of people ghost me who booked appointments and then never showed up, but it's rare. It's rare.
Right.
Maybe 1 in 50, something like that. I probably could have done a better job reminding them that they were going to be a guest, and there was a long gap in between when we booked, but you did a good job with that. I received a couple of email reminders today.
I like
Calendly. That worked pretty well.
Calendly is the one that I use, and I got when I got the paid version, because I was using a free version for a while, and then when I got the paid version, a couple bucks or something a month, you can do text or email reminders like 24 hours and then like 1 hour before, something like that. A lot of softwares use that, and I found that it's pretty helpful, like you said as well. So, and I also would like to say that I really like what you do with having a Google Doc that you share, because I send a document that I had outlining some questions. I send that to people, right? But you took it a step further with a shareable document that you both edit. And do you have individualized questions for
that's all I ask is individual questions, because they're in space, for example, or they run a software company or whatever, but they're each coming at it from their own perspective, and we have a pretty good idea of what we're going to discuss. So it's not like the last guest, right? You've even had 4 space lawyers on and booked to be on, and you might think, well, what the heck are they going to talk about that's different? Actually, interpretation and area of focus, it's all different. So, and they're going to want to talk about this area of it and not this one, right? So so it is always individual, and like I said earlier, I always have this like, I got to go make up these questions. Do I really have to do that? But then when and it's usually Saturday morning or Sunday, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go do it now, and I'll knock 2 or 3 of them out for the following week, and it'll be okay once I get into it. But there is that copywriter thing of, this time I will fail. Come up with good questions, but they're always like, oh, you ask such great questions. So
it always happens, especially sometimes. I've noticed this, and actually it's happened with this interview. Listeners may be able to pick up on it, is that as you saw in the document that I sent, I have questions that I outline that I usually ask. A lot of questions I asked you weren't even on the document, and they were really just follow-up questions based on where the conversation went. So how have you found how it's been important to me, and I'm sure it's been important to you as well, to not have to stop the conversation and move on to another question because it's on the list. Just kind of go with the flow, go where the conversation brings you. Have you done that as well?
Yeah, the point is to have a good conversation and let that person express themselves, right? And talk about topics that they want to talk about and you want to find out about. In that, usually we're going long here, which is good. I hope people are getting value from it. But mine are usually 25 to 45 minutes, sometimes a little bit longer. And I have I've had to chase a few people off the show, usually without them knowing it, recently, because it was getting too long, and I wanted to keep it around that 45 minutes. But after this is okay. Actually, this is good too. After you're done recording on Zoom and you press stop, don't disappear off of the Zoom connections. Stick around and talk with this person. You've got them. They're feeling good about you and themselves. They're probably going to be effusive for 10 or 15, 20 minutes, right? And I've had a lot of good conversations after the recording that go somewhere. And you can always, as I do, invite them back on. Invite them back on. Right? For another recording. If you talk for 35, 45 minutes and they're like, wow, I got through half my notes, right? I could talk about that a lot more. Good, sure. Book another interview. That's okay. There is a tendency out there, I have noticed, especially among newbie guests, that it's a once and done thing, like a once in a lifetime opportunity to be on the Cold Star Project. I'm like, dude, relax. When I get along and you have a good message to share. I've had Adam Crowell and I are recording. He's a space blogger from Australia. I think we're doing his 4th episode from a year ago through now, right? Tomorrow, I think he's in Australia, so the times are all wonky. But so it's very, and they're all different topics, in space, but we have a fun time. And he was my very first guest on as a space topic guest. So yeah. Look at the time limits. You don't want them going for an hour and a half. Usually, that's probably a bit long for people. But I don't like this thing that I see occasionally on Facebook. I only see it on Facebook, not on other social media. What's a good 5 to 10 minute podcast? What are you going to get from that? If you need a shot of motivation or something, you're probably in the wrong business.
Right.
That's my thought.
There is value in maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, something or less. But mostly, I mean, honestly, you don't really have these conversations unless they're half hour to 45 minutes. And this interview with you now is definitely going longer than most of my interviews. But it's not a bad thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, look what we're getting into, right? Exactly. I mean, if you're going to make a podcast, you probably got a lot about the gears and guts of the thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's lots of interesting things that will come up. I mean, a lot of the times things may not come up out of a conversation until a 30-minute mark.
Right.
And then why would you just cut that off? And I think there is something to be said about having someone on for a second time. And that's, that's just interesting that a lot of people may not think to do that. They think, they have a guest on. Okay, well, that's my only opportunity. Or, the guest is like, okay, this is my only opportunity. But that's not true. Have somebody on. There's always going to be something more they can share if you feel like there would be more value. Yeah, like for example, I think there would be a lot of value in like a second episode with you, because there are other topics that we didn't even get to, and that we could probably talk for another hour, but that wouldn't. Podcasts shouldn't go over like an hour or an hour and 5 minutes, something like that. People might start to drop off.
Yeah.
So I would like to say thank you for that.
You bet. And notice, people, we have not talked about equipment in the slightest way, except for maybe video editing. That's it. But
right. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation. All of the back end stuff too. I talk with a lot of people about the conversation as well. So in the spirit of wrapping things up, what would be, and I usually like to end with the same question. What would be your number one tip for listeners out there who are unsure about whether or not a podcast is right for them? They don't know if it would fit, and we didn't dive into too deeply the marketing and in sales and like how you use a podcast with the business. That'll have to be in part 2, which I would love to have, because that's a whole other half of it. Part of it is, how can I actually make money from this? But as of right now, for those people out there who are thinking about it and are unsure, what would you say to them?
Yeah, well, again, it goes back to that word relevance. And I can remember a former business partner looking at me funny when I brought that up about a podcast we were looking at doing at the time, which we did. And I said, is this going to be relevant to our target market? And so there is this isn't my approach, but it is a good approach. So
okay,
I'll use something right there. You should probably look at niches and see, are there listeners for podcasts in this niche already? I went and created something that didn't really exist yet, right? And it was probably dumb of me too. So a business podcast about scaling, okay, pretty specific, right? There are a lot of space podcasts out there, right? But not many space business shows, right? Or space business operations management shows, which is more what it's becoming about, right? So, and be okay with it evolving from where you started into something that people will actually listen to and take seriously. Right. It's okay. It is an evolutionary process, and don't start it unless you're willing to go the whole way, whatever that takes, right? But you can, as we've heard, you can do many things to manage that, you as a resource, or that time suck that it could potentially be, and keep it limited so that it's under control and you can keep producing that body of work that we talked about and move forward and get more and more dialed into producing content that an audience is going to pick up on, and then come back to you and say, hey, I want to hire you for something related to this about.
Right. Yeah, no, definitely. And that's interesting. You really that's interesting. So find an industry, find a section that people already are kind of listening to, that you see that they enjoy, and then find a way to have your own spin on it, right? Don't have a podcast that no one is going to listen to because, but take, like you said, space. Okay, there's a lot of people who listen to space podcasts. So how can you be a special podcast within that industry? So yeah, it takes some thought, but it's worth it, because that is how you get people to listen, because A, people will listen to that type of podcast, but B, you're unique enough for them to choose you over someone else. So yeah, so I'd like to say thank you, Jason, for an incredible conversation. I do really appreciate it. I think we had a great conversation. I enjoyed it, and I think the listeners are going to enjoy it, and I would definitely be open to a part 2 at some point.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sounds good. You're welcome.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Path to Podcast Success. Make sure to head over to ipodcastedit.com to check out the show notes and get each episode of the show delivered right to your inbox. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or whichever audio service you use. If you want to continue the conversation, or you have a topic you'd like me to discuss on a future episode of the show, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you again for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next episode as we continue down the path to podcast success.